Imagine this, the sterile chill of a hospital room. Not one of joy, but of shattering betrayal. Elena Petrova, 9 months pregnant, her body aching, her heart already in pieces, lies just rooms away. But her husband, the charismatic billionaire Julian Vance, isn't by her side. He's in another wing, a different kind of celebration unfolding. Beside him, radiant and triumphant, stands Sophia Laurent, his mistress. And in Julian's hand, a pen hovering over a birth certificate. His name etching itself onto another child's life, while the silent sobs of his wife echo in the forgotten corners of his conscience. This is the story of a vow broken, a family fractured, and a fortune built on a foundation of lies. Stay with us as we unravel the truth behind. The scent of antiseptic and roses fought a strange battle in the VIP suite of the Azure Bay Maternity Clinic. Roses because Julian Vance spared no expense, even for the birth of his mistress's child. Antiseptic because beneath the veneer of luxury, this was still a hospital, a place of raw, unfiltered life. Sophia Laurent, her dark hair artfully tousled against the pristine white pillows, gave a radiant, if slightly weary, smile. Her newborn son, swaddled in cashmere, lay in a state-of-the-art bassinet beside her. Julian Vance, tall, impeccably dressed, in a Brioni suit that probably cost more than the average nurse's annual salary, stood by the window, looking out over the glittering cityscape of Miami. He was the founder of Vance Innovations, a tech empire that had catapulted him into the stratosphere of the ultra-rich. "He's perfect, isn't he, Julian?" Sophia murmured, her voice husky. "He has your eyes, I think." Julian turned a practiced smile on his handsome face. "He's a strong boy, Sophia. You did well." He moved closer, his gaze lingering on the infant. Alexander Laurent Vance, a good strong name. A nurse, Ms. Albright, a woman whose expression remained studiously neutral despite years of witnessing every conceivable human drama, entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Laurent. Just the birth registration forms to complete." Julian took the offered pen, a custom Mont Blanc. Sophia watched him, her eyes gleaming. This was it, the culmination of years of careful planning, of sidelong glances at society events, of clandestine meetings in five-star hotels from Paris to Tokyo. This child was her anchor, her claim. As Julian's pen moved, signing his name with a flourish officially acknowledging paternity, neither of them heard the muffled sob from a room 3 doors down. There, in a standard though still private room, the kind his company's excellent insurance covered, but not the kind he personally frequented, lay Elena Petrova Vance. Her own due date was less than a week away. A sympathetic junior nurse, a young woman named Maria, had just broken the news, her voice trembling. She'd seen Julian Vance striding into the VIP wing with Ms. Laurent, had heard the cooing, and had seen the champagne being discreetly delivered. She knew Mrs. Vance from her prenatal appointments, a quiet, kind woman with sad eyes. Maria, against protocol, but driven by a fierce sense of justice, had felt compelled to tell her. "Mrs. Vance, I don't know how to say this." Maria had stammered, twisting her apron. "Mr. Vance, he's here, in the VIP wing, with another woman. She just had a baby boy. He's signing the birth certificate." Elena's world, already fractured, splintered into a million irreparable pieces. The physical pain of her late-stage pregnancy, the Braxton Hicks contractions that had been her constant companions for days, was nothing compared to the agony lancing through her soul. She had known, of course, about Sophia. The whispers had been deafening in their social circle for months. The late nights Julian attributed to critical business, the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the emotional Grand Canyon that had opened between them. She had confronted him, tears streaming down her face, her swollen belly a testament to the vows he was trampling. Julian, ever the master manipulator, had been smooth dismissive. "Elena, darling, you're hormonal, stressed. Sophia is a business associate, a friend, nothing more. You're letting gossip get to you. Focus on our baby, on us." He'd gaslighted her so effectively, so consistently, that she'd almost started to doubt her own sanity. Almost. But the evidence had become too blatant. A hotel receipt carelessly left in a pocket, a jeweled earring found in his car, his increasing coldness towards her. Now this, the ultimate public betrayal. Signing his name to another woman's child, while she, his wife, the mother of his soon-to-be-born legitimate heir, lay abandoned, a forgotten footnote in his triumphant narrative. The tears streamed silently down Elena's face, soaking the starched hospital pillow. She didn't scream, didn't rage. A chilling numbness had enveloped her. The love she had once felt for Julian, a radiant, all-consuming fire, had died, leaving behind only cold, hard ash. In its place, something else was stirring, a flicker of resolve born from the deepest despair. She thought of her parents, Mikhail and Anya Petrova, hard-working immigrants who had sacrificed everything for her to have a better life, to get the education that had led her to meet Julian at a university gala where she was a promising architecture student and he was a rising tech star. They had been so proud. What would they think now? The name Alexander Laurent Vance echoed in her mind. A name that should have been a source of joy, now a symbol of her humiliation. As Julian Vance walked out of Sophia Laurent's suite, his phone buzzed. It was his PA. "Sir, Mrs. Vance's obstetrician, Dr. Ramirez, called. She's been admitted. Early labor." Julian sighed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. The timing was inconvenient. "All right, tell Dr. Ramirez I'm on my way. Inform security to keep the paparazzi away from her wing. And from this one." He glanced back at Sophia's door, then strode towards the elevators, the weight of two families, two futures resting on his custom-made Italian leather shoes. He was Julian Vance. He could manage anything. Or so he believed. The corridors of Azure Bay Maternity Clinic seemed to stretch endlessly as Julian made his way from the opulent VIP wing to the more modest private rooms. The shift in atmosphere was palpable, less champagne, more hushed anxiety. When he finally reached Elena's room, Dr. Ramirez, a woman whose calm demeanor usually reassured him, met him with a cool, appraising look. "Julian," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Elena is distressed. Her blood pressure is elevated. We need to keep her calm." Of course," Julian replied, a mask of concern slipping easily into place. He walked into the room. Elena lay pale and still, her eyes closed. The only sign of her turmoil was the tear track on her cheek and the way her fingers were clenched white around the bedsheet. "Elena, my love," he began, his voice oozing feigned tenderness. "I just heard. I came as quickly as I could." Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment the raw pain in them made him flinch internally. But there was something else too, a coldness he hadn't seen before. "Did you?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of accusation, which was somehow more unsettling. "Or did your other commitments delay you?" Julian feigned confusion. "Other commitments, darling? My only commitment right now is to you and our baby." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "Save it, Julian," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Nurse Maria was kind enough to inform me of your other celebration. Congratulations on Alexander Laurent Vance. Julian felt a surge of anger towards the interfering nurse, but his face remained smooth. Elena, that's a misunderstanding. Sophia needed support, and as a friend, a bitter laugh escaped Elena's lips. A friend whose child you just legitimized with your signature while your pregnant wife is down the hall. What a noble friend you are, Julian. Dr. Ramirez cleared her throat. Perhaps this discussion can wait. Elena needs to focus on the delivery. But Elena wasn't done. No, doctor. I think this discussion is long overdue. Julian, I want you to know that I know everything. The apartment you bought for her in the Bayside Towers, the little trips to St. Bart's on the company jet, the Vance Foundation donations that mysteriously ended up funding her art gallery, Gallery Sophia. Julian was momentarily stunned. He'd underestimated her. He'd thought her quiet, perhaps a little naive. He'd forgotten the sharp intellect that had once drawn him to her. Elena, you're overwrought, sir, he tried, but his usual confidence wavered. Am I... She pushed herself up slightly. Or am I finally seeing clearly the only thing I'm overwrought about is the fact that my child is about to be born into this charade? Just then, a sharp pain made her gasp, her hand flying to her belly. Dr. Ramirez was instantly at her side. All right, Elena, breathe. Julian, perhaps it's best if you wait outside for a bit. Relief warred with unease as Julian stepped out. The situation was messier than he'd anticipated. He'd envisioned a quiet divorce after their child was born, a generous settlement for Elena, and a seamless transition to his new life with Sophia and their son. He hadn't counted on Elena finding her spine at the 11th hour. Hours later, after a grueling labor that Elena endured with a stoicism that unnerved Julian more than tears would have, their daughter was born. Maya Anya Vance, small, perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like Eleanor's and, ironically, Julian's determined chin. When they placed Maya in Elena's arms, a profound, fierce love, unlike anything she had ever known, washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the pain of Julian's betrayal. This tiny, vulnerable creature was hers, and she would protect her. Julian, observing the scene, felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just the inconvenience of a more complicated future. He put on his best, doting father face. She's beautiful, Elena, just like her mother. Elena didn't look at him. Her world had narrowed to the tiny face nestled in her arms. Dr. Ramirez, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'd like to make some calls. To my lawyer, for one. Julian's head snapped up. Lawyer Elena, now is not the time. On the contrary, Julian, she said, finally meeting his gaze, her eyes like chips of ice. There's never been a better time. Get out. Elena? Get out. Each word was a frozen shard. And tell your friend that I hope she enjoys the view from Bayside Towers. It's about to get a lot less comfortable. Julian, accustomed to commanding rooms and people, found himself momentarily speechless. He saw Dr. Ramirez looking at him with disapproval, a nurse hovering protectively near Elena. He was for once not in control. With a tight nod, he turned and left his mind racing. This wasn't just a marital spat anymore. This was war. Back in her VIP suite, Sophia Laurent was preening. She'd seen Julian's brief, strained visit to Elena's wing from her window. She felt a surge of triumph. The wife was clearly hysterical emotional. Julian would soon tire of that drama. He'd gravitate back to her, to the peace and adoration she offered to their son. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Enjoying the champagne, Sophia, hope it doesn't leave a bitter taste. Some signatures aren't as binding as you think, especially when they're built on deceit. Tick-tock? Sophia frowned. Who would send such a thing? A prank or something more? A shiver unrelated to the air conditioning ran down her spine. She looked at her son, Alexander, sleeping peacefully. He was her ticket, her security. No one would take that away from her. Meanwhile, Elena, cradling Maya, made her first call. Not to a divorce lawyer, not yet, but to a name whispered to her months ago by a concerned acquaintance who had seen the storm clouds gathering around the Vances. Mr. Marcus Thorne. My name is Elena Vance. I believe you're an investigator. I need your help. My husband is Julian Vance, and I think he's not just unfaithful. I think he might be a monster. Marcus Thorne was a name that rarely appeared in society pages, but was frequently whispered in their aftermath. A former investigative journalist with a bloodhound's tenacity and a ghost's discretion, he now ran a boutique private investigation firm, Thorne and Associates, specializing in the kind of high-stakes, high-net-worth cases that required surgical precision and an impervious moral compass, or at least one that could be flexibly aimed. He listened patiently on the other end of the line, as Elena, her voice still raw with emotion, but underscored by a new, steely determination, recounted her story. She omitted nothing. The slow decay of her marriage, Julian's increasingly blatant affair with Sophia Laurent, the whispers of financial irregularities she'd dismissed as stress-induced paranoia, and the final devastating blow of the birth certificate. Mrs. Vance, Thorne said, when she finally paused, his voice a calm baritone. This is a distressing situation. What exactly are you hoping to achieve by engaging my services? Elena held Maya closer, the warmth of her tiny body a grounding force. I want the truth, Mr. Thorne, all of it. I suspect Sophia Laurent is not just some opportunistic mistress. There's a ruthlessness to her, a calculation that chills me. And Julian, he's built an empire. I want to know if that empire is built on anything solid or if it's as rotten as our marriage. Mostly, her voice cracked. I need to protect my daughter. If I'm to fight him, and I will, I need ammunition. I need to know what I'm up against. I understand, Thorne replied. My fees are considerable, Mrs. Vance. My father, Mikhail Petrova, was a master carpenter, Mr. Thorne. He taught me the value of good foundations. He also left me a small but significant inheritance money Julian doesn't know the full extent of. He always called it my just-in-case fund. I think this qualifies as just in case. A rare hint of a smile touched Thorne's lips. Very well, Mrs. Vance. We can begin immediately. I'll need any information you have, names, dates, access to any shared accounts or documents. You can ethically provide details about Julian's inner circle, his routines, anything you can think of regarding Miss Laurent. Over the next few days, while Elena recovered physically from childbirth, a clandestine operation began. She'd sneak moments on a burner phone Thorne had arranged to be delivered, feeding him snippets of information. Her friend, Dr. Lena Hansen, a respected art historian who had always harbored suspicions about Sophia's meteoric rise in the gallery world, also became an invaluable, if unwitting, source. Lena had crossed paths with Sophia professionally and found her knowledge of art surprisingly superficial for someone running a gallery like Gallery Sophia, known for its exclusive, high-priced contemporary pieces. Julian, in the meantime, was feeling the pressure. Elena, had returned to their palatial waterfront mansion in Golden Beach, but it was a cold homecoming. She moved into a guest wing, communicating with him only through her newly hired formidable divorce attorney, a shark named Beatrice Beer Holloway, whose reputation preceded her. Beer had immediately filed for exclusive use of the marital home for Elena and Maya, citing emotional distress and Julian's blatant infidelity. "This is ridiculous," Julian had raged at his own lawyer, the slick, unflappable Arthur Jenkins of Jenkins Finch and Associates. "She can't just kick me out of my own house." "Technically, Mr. Vance," Arthur had replied smoothly, "with a newborn and given the public nature of your other relationship, the courts may lean sympathetically towards Mrs. Vance's request for the time being. We need to manage the optics." Optics. Julian hated that word. He was used to creating his own reality. He visited Sophia and Alexander at the Bayside Towers apartment, a lavish penthouse he'd purchased under a shell corporation. Sophia was becoming increasingly demanding, sensing her moment. "When are you going to deal with Elena Julian?" she'd asked, stroking baby Alexander's cheek. "This limbo is untenable. We need to be a proper family. Alexander needs his father properly and publicly." She'd also shown him the anonymous threatening text message. "Someone is trying to intimidate me." Julian had dismissed the text. "Probably just some jealous socialite, my dear. Don't worry about it." But privately, it irked him. It was another loose thread, another sign that his carefully constructed world was fraying at the edges. Thorne's investigation, meanwhile, was beginning to yield fruit. He was meticulous. He started with Sophia Laurent. Her official biography painted her as a Parisian ingenue, educated in art history at the Sorbonne, who had come to Miami and charmed her way into the art scene. Thorne's dig into her past, however, revealed cracks in that facade. Her real name was Sophie Dubois, and while she had spent time in Paris, it wasn't at the Sorbonne, but rather working in a series of low-level jobs, including a stint at a nightclub with a less-than-stellar reputation near the Champs-Élysées. There was a gap of 2 years in her late teens that was completely unaccounted for. "Interesting," Thorne mused to his associate, a tech whiz named Chloe. "Our Parisian princess might have a few skeletons in her armoire." He then turned his attention to Vance Innovations. Julian's company was a behemoth specializing in proprietary AI algorithms for financial markets and data security. It was mostly privately held, with Julian owning a controlling stake. Thorne began by looking at the flow of money, particularly the Vance Foundation, which Julian used for his philanthropic endeavors, and as Elena suspected, for other less altruistic purposes. Chloe, using her skills to navigate the labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell corporations that often accompanied vast fortunes, flagged a series of transactions from the Vance Foundation to entities connected to Gallery Sophia. The amounts were substantial, disguised as grants for artistic development or cultural exchange programs. "It's more than just funding a mistress's hobby, Mrs. Vance," Thorne reported to Elena during one of their discreet calls. "The sums are disproportionate to the gallery's legitimate turnover. It looks less like patronage and more like a very sophisticated form of money movement." Elena felt a chill. "Money laundering? It's a possibility we're exploring," Thorne said carefully. "There are also unusually large payments to a consulting firm based in the Cayman Islands, Viridian Consulting. It has all the hallmarks of a shell, and it was set up shortly after Miss Laurent, or Miss Dubois, appeared on the scene in Miami." A new, horrifying thought began to form in Elena's mind. What if Sophia wasn't just a gold digger? What if she was involved in something far more dangerous and Julian was complicit, or worse, being played? the anonymous text Sophia had received suddenly took on a more sinister light. Some signatures aren't as binding as you think, especially when they're built on deceit. Whose deceit? Sophia's Julian's. Both one evening, as Eleanor rocked Maya to sleep, her eyes fell on a small, antique wooden box her father had carved for her. It contained her most precious mementos. Inside, beneath old letters and photographs, was a small, velvet pouch, her just-in-case fund, but there was something else her father had given her, a love for puzzles, for seeing how things fit together. She remembered Julian's early days, his obsessive secrecy around certain aspects of his business, his casual dismissal of her questions. She chalked it up to entrepreneurial focus. Now she wondered. She thought about Sophia's 2 missing years. Paris, nightclubs. What happened during that time? And how did a woman with such a dubious past reinvent herself so completely and ensnare a man like Julian Vance, a man who, for all his faults, was no fool? A particular memory surfaced. A charity ball years ago. Julian had been talking to a shadowy European businessman, Nikolai Volkov, a man rumored to have ties to organized crime. Sophia had been there that night, not yet Julian's mistress, but definitely in his orbit, introduced as an art consultant. Elena had felt a prickle of unease about Volkov then. Could there be a connection? She relayed this to Thorne. Nikolai Volkov. Yes, his name has come up in relation to other discreet inquiries. Thorne said, his voice guarded. This adds another layer, Mrs. Vance, a potentially dangerous one. The threads were not just unraveling. They were starting to form a terrifying tapestry. Elena knew she was in deeper than she could have ever imagined. But with Maya's soft breath against her neck, her resolve hardened. She would see this through, no matter the cost. Marcus Thorne, a man who prided himself on his unflappability, felt a distinct thrill of the hunt. The name Nikolai Volkov was a significant escalation. Volkov wasn't just some generic shady businessman, he was a player in the murky world of international illicit finance and influence peddling, with rumored connections that stretched from Eastern Europe to the art markets of London and New York. If Sophia Laurent, and by extension Julian Vance, were tangled with Volkov, this case was far more explosive than a billionaire's messy divorce. Thorne decided to leverage his old contacts in European law enforcement. While Chloe dug deeper into Viridian Consulting and its transactions with Vance Innovations, Thorne put out feelers about Sophie Dubois and any known associates of Volkov who matched her description or timeline. Meanwhile, Elena was living in a gilded prison. Julian, furious at being barred from his own home and under pressure from Sophia, had instructed Arthur Jenkins to play hardball. Motions were filed demanding Elena undergo psychiatric evaluation, citing her erratic behavior and delusional accusations. He was trying to paint her as an unstable, vindictive woman, unfit to make decisions about their child or his finances. "He's trying to break me, B," Elena said, her voice trembling during a meeting with her lawyer. Baby Maya gurgled softly in her carrier. Bea Holloway, a woman whose sharp suits were as formidable as her courtroom presence, patted Elena's hand, a rare gesture of softness. "Of course he is, my dear. It's the classic playbook of a powerful man cornered. But we're not going to let him. Thorne is making progress, and you, Elena, are stronger than Julian gives you credit for." Elena found an unexpected source of strength in the routine of caring for Maya. The late-night feedings, the soft lullabies, the fierce, primal love she felt for her daughter, it all coalesced into an unshakable resolve. She also started quietly documenting everything. Julian's past comments, his financial dealings she'd been privy to, names of his associates. She was no longer just a grieving wife. She was an archivist of her own life, searching for clues. The breakthrough came from Paris. Thorne's contact, an old friend from Interpol named Inspector Dubois, no relation, ironically, to Sophia's original surname, sent a cryptic message regarding your Sophie Dubois inquiry and Volkov. Look into the unsolved 2015 disappearance of one Jean-Luc Moreau, an art appraiser and authenticator from Lyon. Moreau was last seen in Paris after a meeting with individuals loosely connected to Volkov's circle. He specialized in Russian avant-garde. Also, a young woman matching Dubois's description was known to be an associate of Moreau around that time. Went by the name Lily, then she vanished. Thorne felt the pieces click. Jean-Luc Moreau, he murmured. Lily. Sophia's 2 missing years. He presented this to Elena. Moreau was known to be meticulous, but also rumored to be in debt. If he was involved in authenticating, or perhaps mis-authenticating art for Volkov, and Lily was his protégé or accomplice. Elena's blood ran cold. You think Sophia was involved in something that led to his disappearance? It's a strong possibility, Thorne said gravely. If Moreau became a liability, Volkov is not known for his leniency, and if Lily was smart, she'd disappear and reinvent herself, perhaps with a little nest egg or some compromising information to ensure her silence and future. Suddenly, Sophia Laurent wasn't just a calculating mistress. She was potentially a woman with a dark, dangerous past, possibly a witness or even a participant in serious crimes. And Julian had made her the mother of his child, signed that birth certificate. The anonymous text Sophia received now seemed less like a general threat and more like a targeted message from someone who knew. Signatures built on deceit. Could Moreau still be alive? Or someone close to him seeking revenge or justice? Back at Vance Innovations, Julian was feeling the heat from another direction. A routine internal audit, something he usually rubber-stamped, had flagged irregularities in the Foundation's disbursements to Viridian Consulting. His CFO, a normally placid man named David Chen, had requested an urgent meeting. Julian, Chen said, his face pale. These payments to Viridian. The documentation is thin, very thin, and the amounts are significant. We're talking millions funneled out over the last 2 years, coinciding almost exactly with your association with Miss Laurent. Julian fixed Chen with a steely glare. Are you accusing me of something, David? No, of course not, Julian. Chen stammered, visibly intimidated. But if the IRS, or heaven forbid the SEC, were to look into this, it could be problematic. Very problematic, especially with your divorce proceedings. A disgruntled spouse can open all sorts of Pandora's boxes. Julian's mind raced. He had used Viridian as a conduit, a way to move money discreetly, some for Sophia's gallery, to give it an air of legitimacy, some for other investments ventures he preferred to keep off Vance Innovations' main books. He'd always been meticulous, but perhaps Sophia's demands, her lavish lifestyle, had made him careless. He dismissed Chen with a curt, "I'll handle it." But a seed of doubt was planted. Was Sophia more than just expensive? Was she a liability? That evening, Julian went to the Bayside Towers penthouse. Sophia was in a foul mood. The nanny you hired is incompetent, and this apartment, Julian, while lovely, is beginning to feel like a gilded cage. When are we going to announce ourselves to the world? When will Alexander carry your name with pride, not in whispers? Sophia, Julian said, his voice tight. We need to talk about finances. specifically the gallery and some other arrangements. He brought up Viridian Consulting. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Sophia's face before she smoothed it over. Darling, you know I leave the boring financial details to you. I trust your judgment implicitly. She ran a perfectly manicured finger down his lapel. Don't I always take good care of your investments? Her eyes, usually so adoring, held a glint that he now found unsettling. It was the same glint he'd seen when she first maneuvered her way into his life, a predatory focus that he'd mistaken for ambition and passion. He left the penthouse feeling more disturbed than ever. The foundations of his empire, his life felt like they were shifting beneath him. Elena, meanwhile, received an encrypted file from Thorn. It was a grainy photograph, years old, taken outside a Paris cafe. A younger, harder-looking Sophia, Lily, was seated with a distinguished older man, Jean-Luc Moreau. And standing in the background, half obscured by a newspaper, was another man whose face made Elena gasp. It was Stéphane Julien's enigmatic head of security, a man who had been with Julien for years, his past shrouded in mystery. Julien had always referred to him as his most loyal asset. Stéphane in Paris near Moreau, and the woman who would become Sophia Laurent years before she officially entered Julien's life. Thorn, Elena, breathed into the burner phone. Stéphane, Julien's head of security. He was there. He knows her from Paris. The implications were staggering. Was Stefan Volkov's man placed with Julien, or was Julien himself more deeply enmeshed with Volkov than she could ever have imagined, with Sophia being a deliberate plant from the start? The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was a complex web of deceit, with Julien, Sophia, and possibly dangerous international figures all entangled. And Elena, with baby Maya, was right in the middle of it. Just then, her personal cell phone rang. It was Julien. His voice was strained. Elena, we need to talk urgently, not with lawyers, just you and me. About Sophia, about everything. Was this a trap? Or had the pressure finally gotten to him? Elena agreed to meet Julien, but on her terms, a neutral public location, the sprawling botanical gardens of Fairchild Tropical Garden, a place with too many witnesses for overt threats. She also informed B. Holloway and Marcus Thorne, who arranged for discreet surveillance. Thorne, intrigued by Stefan's connection, was particularly keen. The humid Miami air hung heavy as Elena waited on a secluded bench near the orchid exhibit, Maya asleep in her stroller. Julien arrived looking haggard. The impeccable sheen he usually wore was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a tension that radiated off him. Elena, he began, his voice raspy, thank you for meeting me. What do you want, Julien? She asked, her tone devoid of warmth. He sighed, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. This whole thing with Sophia, it's more complicated than you think, than I thought. Complicated? Elena raised an eyebrow. Or criminal? Julien flinched. I made some mistakes, misjudgments. Sophia, she's not who I thought she was. He recounted his growing unease, the financial irregularities Chen had pointed out, Sophia's increasing demands, and a veiled threat she'd made when he'd questioned her about Viridian Consulting and some of its more opaque dealings. She hinted that she has leverage, information that could damage me, the company. Information about your dealings with Nikolai Volkov, perhaps? Elena watched his face carefully. Julien went pale. How do you know that name? I know a lot of things, Julien. I know Sophia used to be Sophie Dubois, also known as Lily. I know she was an associate of Jean-Luc Moreau, an art appraiser who vanished in Paris. I know your head of security. Stefan was also in Paris around that time, near them both. Julian looked like he'd been physically struck. He sank onto the bench. Stefan, he whispered. He recommended her, said she was a brilliant art consultant who could help the foundation. He vetted her. The pieces were falling into a horrifying pattern. Stefan hadn't just been Julian's security chief. He had likely been Volkov's man all along, subtly manipulating Julian, introducing Sophia into his life as a beautiful, intelligent Trojan horse. Sophia's role was to bind Julian to Volkov, likely through a combination of seduction, financial entanglement, and eventually blackmail. The child Alexander was the ultimate insurance policy. Julian, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. You've been played, royally, by Sophia, by Stefan, and almost certainly by Volkov. That money flowing through the Vance Foundation and Viridian Consulting, where was it really going? What was it really for? He looked down, shame and fear warring on his face. Some of it was to legitimize certain artifacts, artworks. Volkov deals in antiquities sometimes of questionable provenance. Sophia, with her gallery, was meant to be a clean channel. I thought it was just aggressive business, bending rules, not breaking laws. And now, Julian admitted, his voice barely a whisper, I think Volkov owns a part of me. And Sophia, she's his enforcer. She hinted that if I don't cooperate, if I don't continue to allow my company to be used, evidence of certain transactions could find its way to the authorities, or worse, to people who don't bother with authorities. Elena felt a cold dread, but also a strange kind of vindication. Her instincts had been right. This was bigger than infidelity. And the baby Julian Alexander, was he part of the plan too? Julian looked utterly defeated. I don't know. I thought I wanted a son. She knew that. He looked at Maya, sleeping peacefully. I was a fool. Yes, you were, Elena agreed, and a cruel one. But right now, we have a mutual problem. Volkov and Sophia. They won't stop. They'll bleed you dry, destroy your company, and if we fight them, they could endanger Maya. Suddenly, a new figure emerged from the path, Sophia Laurent. Her expression was glacial. Behind her, a respectful distance away, was Stefan. What a touching family reunion, Sophia said, her voice dripping sarcasm. Julian, darling, I thought we had an understanding. No more clandestine meetings with the hysterical wife. Stefan moved slightly, his presence a silent threat. Thorne's men, hidden amongst the tourists, and Flora tensed. Sophia, Julian said, standing up, trying to regain some semblance of control. This has gone too far. On the contrary, Julian, Sophia purred, stepping closer, it's only just beginning. You see, Elena, your husband made promises, not just to me, but to people far more influential, people who don't take kindly to broken agreements. She gestured vaguely towards Stefan. Some signatures, like the one on my son's birth certificate, are binding. Others, her eyes flicked to Julian, can be enforced. Elena stood her ground. And what about your signature, Sophia? Or should I say, Lily? The one you forged on Jean-Luc Moreau's authentication papers before he conveniently disappeared. Sophia's smile faltered for a split second. Stefan took a step forward. That's a wild accusation. Sophia recovered quickly. You're grasping at straws. Am I? Elena pressed. Mr. Thorne has been very thorough. Interpol is also very interested in Jean-Luc Moreau's fate, and anyone connected to him, especially anyone connected to Nikolai Volkov. At the mention of Interpol and Volkov, In the same breath, Stefan's eyes narrowed. Sophia's composure finally cracked a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You wouldn't dare," Sophia hissed. "You'd bring Julian down with us. His company, his reputation, everything." "Perhaps," Eleanor said coolly, "but some things are more important than reputations and companies. My daughter's safety for one. And a lifetime of being blackmailed and controlled is no life at all. Is it, Julian?" Julian looked from Sophia's venomous face to Elena's resolute one. He saw the trap. He was in a trap, largely of his own making, but one Sophia and Stefan had expertly sprung. "What do you propose, Elena?" he asked, his voice heavy with resignation. Before Elena could answer, Thorne stepped out from behind a large banyan tree, flanked by two of his operatives. Simultaneously, other figures, B. Holloway, and to everyone's surprise, David Chen, Julian's CFO, emerged from different points. Chen was holding a briefcase. "Actually, Mr. Vance," Thorne said calmly, "Mrs. Vance isn't proposing anything. She's merely facilitating." "Mr. Chen, I believe you have something for us." David Chen, looking terrified but determined, stepped forward. "Julian, I couldn't let this happen. I've made copies of all transactions related to Viridian Consulting and the Foundation's disbursements to Miss Laurent's gallery. I've also documented irregularities that point to significant money laundering with clear links back to initial fund sources connected with Mr. Volkov's known associates. I've already spoken to the SEC and the FBI." Sophia gasped. Stefan tensed his hand, subtly moving inside his jacket. "Don't even think about it, Stefan." Thorne warned, his eyes like steel. "My colleagues here are armed, and this entire park is under surveillance. More importantly, Mr. Volkov wouldn't appreciate a public shootout involving his operative. Bad for his kind of business." Stefan froze, his face a mask of cold fury. Sophia looked wildly from Julian to Eleanor to Thorne. "You can't prove anything. This is all circumstantial." "Oh, I think we can be," Holloway interjected, stepping forward with a folder. "We have sworn affidavits, bank records, and soon we'll have testimony. Perhaps even from Jean-Luc Moreau's family, who have been searching for answers for years. And then there's the matter of paternity, Ms. Laurent." Sophia's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" B smiled thinly. "While Mr. Vance was foolish enough to sign a birth certificate under duress and emotional manipulation, a simple DNA test, which we will be petitioning the court for, will reveal the truth about Alexander's parentage. My sources suggest Mr. Vance might not be the only candidate for fatherhood. Perhaps one of Mr. Volkov's more senior associates might have a claim that would certainly complicate your leverage, wouldn't it?" This was a bombshell B had been saving. Thorne's team had uncovered whispers during their investigation into Sophia's Parisian days, rumors of an older, powerful protector within Volkov's syndicate. If Alexander wasn't Julian's son, Sophia's entire hold over Julian would crumble. Sophia stared aghast. The carefully constructed world she'd built was collapsing around her. Her primary leverage, her son's paternity, was now in question. Julian looked at Sophia with utter contempt. "Was any of it real?" Sophia laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Real? What's real, Julian? The money. The power, that's all that matters. You taught me that." Stefan, seeing the situation was untenable, gave a curt nod to Sophia. "We should leave." "Not so fast," Thorne said. As if on cue, two uniformed police officers, accompanied by a plainclothes detective, approached the group. "Sophia Laurent, a.k.a. Sophie Dubois, Stefan Hauer," the detective asked. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding international financial crimes and the disappearance of Jean-Luc Moreau." Sophia's face crumpled. Stefan remained impassive, but did not resist as they were escorted away. Julian watched them go, a broken man. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of despair and a dawning, horrifying understanding of the abyss he had skirted. "Elena, save it, Julian," Elena said, her voice weary but firm. She looked at Maya, still sleeping, oblivious to the storm that had just broken. "You have a lot to answer for. To the authorities, to your shareholders, and to your daughter." The fight was far from over. There would be legal battles, public humiliation, and the long, arduous process of untangling Julian's company from Volkov's influence. But as Elena pushed Maya's stroller away from the scene, leaving Julian to face the consequences of his actions, she felt a sliver of peace. She had faced the monster, and for today, she had won. The path ahead was uncertain, but she would walk it with her head held high for herself and for Maya. The downfall of Julian Vance and the exposure of Sophia Laurent's schemes sent shockwaves through Miami's elite circles and the wider business world. Headlines screamed of the billionaire betrayal, the mistress, the mob, and the money. Vance Innovations' stock plummeted, and the board of directors, spurred by David Chen's courageous whistleblowing and the mounting evidence, swiftly moved to oust Julian as CEO. The legal battles were complex and grueling. Sophia Laurent, facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and potential involvement in Moreau's disappearance, tried to cut a deal offering to testify against Volkov's network in exchange for leniency. Stefan Hauer, ever the stoic operative, remained silent, his fate tied to the shadowy organization he served. Nikolai Volkov himself, of course, remained untouchable in his foreign enclaves, though his reputation suffered a significant blow, and several of his known financial channels were disrupted. The DNA test B. Holloway had threatened proved to be a pivotal revelation. Alexander Laurent was not Julian Vance's biological son. The father was indeed a high-ranking, much older associate of Volkov, a man Sophia had been involved with long before she set her sights on Julian. This discovery shattered Sophia's last vestiges of power over Julian and painted her as an even more manipulative figure, using a child as a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. The court nullified Julian's name on Alexander's birth certificate. The child, an innocent in the whole affair, was placed into temporary foster care, his future uncertain, a tragic consequence of his mother's ambition. Julian Vance faced his own reckoning. He was charged with financial misconduct, money laundering, and severe breaches of fiduciary duty. While his high-powered lawyers managed to keep him out of prison, his career was in ruins, his fortune significantly diminished by legal fees, fines, and the divorce settlement with Eleanor. He became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The empire he had built with such arrogance crumbled not with a bang, but with the slow, inexorable grind of justice and public disgrace. For Elena, life began anew, albeit scarred. The divorce was finalized, and she secured a settlement that, while not the vast fortune Julian once controlled, was more than enough to ensure her and Maya's future. More importantly, she had her freedom and her dignity. She sold the palatial Golden Beach mansion, finding its opulence tainted by too many bitter memories. She bought a more modest, beautiful home, further up the coast, a place with light and air, and a garden where Maya could play. She reconnected with her passion for architecture, starting small, designing sustainable, community-focused projects. Her work, infused with a newfound resilience and empathy, began to gain recognition. she found solace and strength in her parents, Mikhail and Anya, who rallied around her with unwavering love and support, doting on their granddaughter. Her friend, Dr. Lena Hansen, remained a steadfast ally. Marcus Thorne, his job done, faded back into the discreet world he inhabited, but not before expressing his admiration for Elena's courage. David Chen, after a period of intense scrutiny, was lauded for his integrity and went on to a respected position in a financial oversight body. Years passed. Maya grew into a bright, inquisitive child, thankfully untouched by the darkness that had preceded her birth. Elena made sure her world was filled with love, honesty, and the simple joys her own parents had taught her to value. She rarely spoke of Julian, and when she did, it was with a detached sorrow rather than bitterness. One sunny afternoon, Elena was sketching in her home studio, the scent of frangipani drifting in from the garden where Maya was laughing, playing with her grandparents. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Elena?" The voice was hesitant, gravelly, almost unrecognizable. It was Julian. She hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the final court proceedings. "Julian," she replied, her voice calm. I know I have no right," he began, "but I saw an article about your new community project. It's wonderful. You always were talented." There was a pause. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, Elena, for everything, for the pain I caused you, Maya, for the man I became. There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it all." Elena listened, a complex swirl of emotions passing through her. The wounds were deep, but time and her own strength had healed them into scars rather than open sores. "Thank you for saying that, Julian," she said softly. "I hope you find some peace." She didn't offer forgiveness, not explicitly. Some things couldn't be unsaid or undone. But in her voice there was no hatred, only a quiet acceptance of the past and a focus on the future. She ended the call, a chapter finally truly closed. She looked out at Maya, her heart swelling. The betrayal had been devastating, the fight arduous, but she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a woman reborn, stronger, wiser, and dedicated to building a life of meaning and integrity for herself and her daughter. The shadows of the past had finally given way to a brighter, more authentic dawn. And so Elena Vance, once the silent, crying wife, found her voice, her strength, and her justice. Julian's empire, built on deceit, crumbled, and Sophia's manipulative web ensnared herself. This story is a stark reminder that wealth and power cannot shield one from the consequences of betrayal, and that even in the darkest moments, the courage of one individual can bring truth to light. What did you think of Elena's journey? Could you have imagined such a complex web of deceit spun by Sophia and her shadowy associates? What does true justice look like in a situation like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
The air on the billion-dollar yacht. Serafina tasted of salt and secrets. Tonight, under a diamond-dusted moon, self-made magnate Adrian Petrov was celebrating a deal that would cement his legacy. His powerful friends, dripping in jewels and false smiles, toasted his genius with flutes of Dom Perignon. But they were all oblivious. They didn't know the real celebration was a sham. They didn't know that miles away, Adrian's pregnant wife, Isabella, was staring at two blue lines on a test, her heart hammering with a truth that would shatter this perfect illusion. And they certainly didn't know she was on her way to crash this party, carrying the one secret Adrian couldn't control, his hidden heir. The Mediterranean moon was a flawless pearl suspended in a velvet sky, its light spilling across the impossibly blue waters of the Côte d'Azur. It illuminated the striking silhouette of the Serafina, a 300-foot monument to modern opulence, anchored just far enough from the twinkling lights of Monaco to feel like a private kingdom. On its decks, a carefully curated guest list of Europe's elite mingled. There were tech barons with boyish faces and predatory eyes, aging aristocrats clinging to their titles and supermodels, whose beauty was both a currency and a cage. They were all orbiting one man, the sun, around which their gilded world turned tonight, Adrian Petrov. Adrian was a man carved from ambition, with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He possessed a charisma that was both magnetic and menacing. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his hand-tailored Tom Ford suit clinging to his athletic frame. He'd shake a hand, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, and murmur a perfectly pitched pleasantry that made the recipient feel seen, yet simultaneously assessed and dismissed. Tonight he was celebrating the successful acquisition of a rival tech firm, a move the financial papers were calling a masterstroke of corporate woofure. To Adrian, the man who doesn't just climb mountains, he buys them. A Russian oligarch with a booming laugh raised his glass. The crowd roared its approval. Flutes of Dom Perignon, the 2008 vintage, were raised in a glittering salute. The champagne, crisp and effervescent, was a fitting symbol for the evening expensive bubbly and ultimately empty. Adrian acknowledged the toast with a practiced nod, the picture of magnanimous success. But beneath the veneer of triumph, a cold coil of unease was tightening in his gut. The celebration felt premature. The deal was done, but the real victory he sought was still hanging in the balance, a delicate negotiation of a far more personal nature. He scanned the faces on the yacht, a sea of transactional relationships. These weren't friends. They were assets, allies, and potential threats. Every smile was a calculation, every compliment a down payment on a future favor. Miles away in the palatial villa that perched on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Isabella Petrov felt the chill that had nothing to do with the mansion's aggressive air conditioning. The house was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass, white marble, and minimalist furniture. It was featured in magazines, a testament to Adrian's exquisite taste. But to Isabella it was a beautiful, sterile prison. The silence within its walls was a living thing, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below. She stood in the center of their cavernous bathroom, the marble cool beneath her bare feet. In her trembling hand, she held the positive pregnancy test, the third one she had taken that day. Each one had delivered the same stark, terrifying, and wondrous verdict. 2 blue lines, a baby. Adrian's baby. A wave of nausea, one that had become her constant companion for the past 6 weeks, washed over her. But this time, it was laced with a dawning horror. For the past 6 weeks, she had also been living with a growing, shapeless dread. Adrian had been distant his nights away from home, more frequent his explanations for his absences, vague and slick with a corporate jargon she could no longer pretend to understand. He'd told her this trip to Monaco was a solo affair, a boys' club trip to finalize the deal. "It would bore you to tears, my love." He had said, his kiss a cool, fleeting pressure on her forehead. She had wanted to believe him. For 2 years she had played the part of the perfect wife, elegant, supportive, and blissfully incurious. She had stood by his side at countless galas, her smile as practiced as his. She had learned to ignore the whispers of the other wives. the pitying glances that lingered a moment too long. She had convinced herself that the coldness in their marriage was simply the price of his ambition, that the man she had fallen in love with, the passionate, driven man who had swept her off her feet, was still there, buried beneath layers of wealth and power. But the two blue lines changed everything. This was no longer about her loneliness or her suspicions. This was about a child. Her child. A child who deserved a father, not a phantom. A child who deserved more than a life in a gilded cage. The final straw had come an hour ago. A stray email left open on Adrian's tablet. It was from his personal assistant, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her icy loyalty. The subject line was, Monaco Celebration Logistics. Isabella's finger had hovered over the screen, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew she shouldn't look. She knew that crossing this line was an act of marital treason from which there was no return. But the need to know the gnawing emptiness of the unknown was a physical force. She opened it. The email contained a detailed itinerary for the yacht party. The guest list, the catering menu from a Michelin-starred chef, the specific vintage of the champagne. And at the bottom, a note that made the blood freeze in her veins. Remise Dubois's arrival. Please ensure she is brought directly to the master suite upon boarding. Mr. Petrov wishes to speak with her, privately, before the other guests arrive. Discretion is paramount. Miss Dubois. Chloe Dubois. A name Isabella had seen before in the society pages, a Parisian art dealer with a reputation as formidable as her beauty. A name Adrian had mentioned once dismissively as a business acquaintance. The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its simplicity, that it shattered the last vestiges of Isabella's denial. The party wasn't just a business celebration. It was a lie. Her husband was a lie. A strange calm settled over her. The nausea receded, replaced by a steely resolve. She would not sit in this silent mausoleum while her husband celebrated his triumphs with another woman. She would not let her child be born into a world of secrets and deceit. She walked to her closet, a room the size of a small apartment filled with designer gowns she rarely had occasion to wear. She bypassed the vibrant silks and sparkling sequins, her hand settling on a simple, elegant gown of ivory crepe. It was understated, almost severe in its design, but it clung to her frame in a way that hinted at the new, gentle curve of her belly. She wouldn't hide it. Not anymore. She slipped on a pair of flat, pearl-adorned sandals, forgoing the stilettos that felt like instruments of torture. She swept her dark hair back into a low, severe ponytail, her face pale but determined in the mirror. She looked like a woman going into battle. As she walked through the echoing halls of the villa, her handbag, a simple leather tote, a stark contrast to the diamond-encrusted clutches she usually carried, slung over her shoulder. She felt a flicker of the woman she used to be. A woman who had been a respected journalist, a woman who had her own voice, her own life before she had allowed herself to be absorbed into Adrian's world. She called for a taxi, not the chauffeured Mercedes that sat gleaming in the garage. She needed the anonymity, the sense of reclaiming a small piece of her independence. As the taxi wound its way down the cliffs towards the glittering lights of the marina, Isabella placed a protective hand over her stomach. The hidden heir. Adrian was on his yacht, celebrating a kingdom built on lies. He had no idea that the one thing that could bring it all crashing down was on its way, cradled safely in the womb of the wife he had so foolishly underestimated. The moonlit party was about to have an uninvited guest. The Port Hercules marina was a forest of gleaming white masts and polished chrome. The air buzzed with a different kind of energy than the silent cliffs. The thrum of engines, the murmur of multiple languages, the distant pulse of music from the various vessels celebrating the warm summer night. Isabella paid the taxi driver her hand steady as she stepped onto the polished cobblestones. In her simple ivory dress, she was an anomaly, a whisper of stark reality amidst the loud performance of wealth. She walked towards the main pier, her tote bag feeling heavier with every step. It contained her wallet, her phone, and the 3 pregnancy tests nestled in a silk pouch. They were her proof, her ammunition. Finding the Serafina was easy. It was the largest, most ostentatiously lit yacht in the harbour, a floating palace that seemed to sneer at the lesser vessels around it. A security team men in sharp suits with discreet earpieces stood at the gangplank. "May I help you, madam?" The head of security was built like a refrigerator, his expression professionally impassive. "I'm here to see my husband," Isabella said, her voice clear and calm. "Adrian Petrov." The man's eyes flickered with a brief, almost imperceptible moment of confusion. He was clearly not expecting her. He glanced at his list, a tablet held in his meaty hand. "I'm sorry I don't have your name down, madame." "I'm sure you don't," Isabella replied, a hint of ice in her tone. "My name is Isabella Petrov. I am his wife. You can either let me on this boat, or I can start making a scene that will attract the attention of every paparazzo currently hiding in the shadows. Your choice." The guard's jaw tightened. He recognized the steely glint in her eyes, the unmistakable look of a woman who had nothing left to lose. He spoke quietly into his wrist. "Sir, we have a situation at the gangplank. A Mrs. Isabella Petrov is here." There was a pause. Isabella could imagine the frantic whispered conversation on the other end. She could picture Adrian's face, the mask of a charming host momentarily slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. After a long moment, the guard nodded stiffly. "Go ahead, Mrs. Petrov." She walked up the gangplank, her flat sandals making a soft, defiant slap with each step. As she stepped onto the teak deck, it was as if she had walked through an invisible barrier. The vibrant soundscape of the party, the smooth jazz, the clinking glasses, the cacophony of self-important conversations seemed to falter. A ripple of silence spread outwards from her, a sudden jarring halt in the rhythm of the night. Heads turned. The music, as if on cue from a confused DJ, faded into an awkward silence. 100 pairs of eyes, a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and predatory glee fixed on her. She was the disruption they had all been secretly craving, a crack in the flawless facade of the evening. She saw the faces of Adrian's friends, their expressions morphing from feigned bonhomie to undisguised fascination. They smelled blood in the water. And then she saw him. Adrian was standing near the grand staircase leading to the upper deck, a flute of champagne in his hand, a beautiful raven-haired woman in a glittering scarlet dress by his side. Chloe Dubois, the art dealer. Her laughter tinkling and artificial died on her lips as she followed Adrian's gaze. Adrian's face was a masterpiece of control. For a split second, Isabella saw it all, the flash of pure, unadulterated rage, the icy panic, the frantic calculation. And then it was gone, smoothed over by a smile that was dazzling, predatory, and utterly false. He disengaged himself from Chloe Dubois, with a practiced ease, his hand leaving a brief proprietary touch on her arm, and began to walk towards Isabella. "Isabella, darling," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr that carried across the silent deck. "What a wonderful surprise. I thought you were feeling unwell." He reached her, and placed a kiss on her cheek. It was as cold as a tombstone. His fingers gripped her arm, the pressure a painful, silent warning. "What are you doing here?" he whispered, his smile never wavering, his eyes boring into hers with a cold fire. "I felt better," Isabella said, her voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. She pulled her arm free from his grasp. "I couldn't bear the thought of you celebrating all alone." A nervous titter went through the crowd. They were hanging on every word, every gesture. This was better than theatre. "Well, the more the merrier," Adrian said, his charm engine working at full capacity. He slipped an arm around her waist, a gesture that looked possessive and romantic, but was in reality a vice, an attempt to control her, to steer her away from the center of attention. "Everyone," he announced, his voice booming with forced joviality, "I'd like you to properly greet my wonderful wife, Isabella. She decided to grace us with her presence after all." A scattered, awkward applause broke out. Chloe Dubois watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. She looked less like a jilted lover and more like a spectator enjoying the opening act of a gladiatorial contest. Isabella let Adrian guide her for a few steps, playing the part of the dutiful wife. She could feel the tension thrumming through his body, the rage simmering just beneath the surface. He was trying to lead her towards a quiet corner, towards the shadows where he could contain this situation. But Isabella had not come here to be contained. She stopped in the very center of the main deck, directly under the brilliant glow of a crystal chandelier. She turned to face him, forcing him to stop with her. She placed her hand on his chest, a seemingly affectionate gesture that made him flinch. "Adrian, darling," she began, her voice ringing with a newfound theatrical clarity. "You're right. It was a surprise. But I had a surprise of my own that simply couldn't wait." She looked around at the sea of expectant faces, from the Russian oligarch to the sneering aristocrats. She held their gaze one by one, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build, until it was a palpable thing, a tightening in the air. She turned her gaze back to her husband, whose smile was now a tight, desperate rictus. "You forgot to tell your friends the most important news of all," she said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. She took a step back, breaking contact with him, and gently, deliberately placed both of her hands over her stomach, cradling the barely there swell of her ivory dress. "We're having a baby." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound that the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull of the yacht sounded like a roar. The champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. The smirks and whispers died. Then the explosion, not of congratulations, but of 1,000 silent calculations. Deals being reevaluated, alliances, shifting social stocks rising and falling. Isabella watched as the mask of pure shock on Adrian's face was quickly replaced by something else, a look of such cold, murderous fury that it made her heart stop. He had been outmaneuvered. In his world of power plays and strategic announcements, she had just launched a hostile takeover of his own narrative. On the moonlit deck of the Serafina, surrounded by his court of sycophants and sharks, Adrian Petrov, the master of the universe, was trapped. And his pregnant wife, the woman he had dismissed and deceived, held the entire world's attention with his hidden heir in her womb as her ultimate, undeniable trump card. The party was just getting started. The feigned applause that followed Isabella's announcement was a discordant mess. It was too loud, too forced, a clumsy attempt to paper over the gaping crater she had just blasted in the middle of the party. People rushed forward, their faces arranged in masks of delight. "Adrian, my boy, a father. This calls for more champagne." The oligarch boomed, slapping Adrian's back with a force that made him stumble. "Oh, Isabella, you're glowing. Absolutely radiant." A woman with a face stretched tight by surgery exclaimed, her eyes darting between Isabella's belly and Adrian's thunderous expression. Adrian, ever the performer, recovered with terrifying speed. He wrapped his arm around Isabella again, this time pulling her so close it was almost painful. He buried his face in her hair, a gesture that looked to the crowd like a moment of overwhelming emotion. But his whisper was venomous, a snake's hiss in her ear. "You have no idea what you've just done. When we are done with this charade, you and I are going to have a talk you will never forget." He pulled back his face, a perfect portrait of a joyous father-to-be. "We're just overwhelmed. We wanted to wait, to tell everyone, to have the moment for ourselves a little longer. But my wife, she's always been impatient." He laughed, and the crowd laughed with him, relieved to be given a script. He needed to get her away from the prying eyes. "Darling, you must be exhausted. Come, let's get you some water. We have a quiet suite downstairs where you can put your feet up." It was an order, not an invitation. He steered her firmly towards a spiral staircase that led to the lower cabins, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her arm, like talons. The eyes of the guests followed them, and Isabella felt a cold thrill of victory. She had ripped the curtain down. Now it was time to face the monster behind it. The moment the suite door clicked shut behind them, the transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The charming, smiling Adrian vanished as if he had never existed. The man who turned to face her was a stranger, his face pale with rage, his eyes glittering with a cold reptilian fury. "Are you insane?" he snarled, his voice a low, guttural sound. He began to pace the opulent cabin, a caged tiger in a silk suit. The room was a smaller version of their sterile mansion, all cream leather, polished chrome, and impersonal art. Of all the stupid, reckless, emotionally incontinent things you could have possibly done, this is monumental. Isabella stood her ground, her back against the door. "I thought you'd be happy. You're going to be a father, Adrian." He stopped pacing and let out a short, barking laugh, devoid of all humor. "Happy? You think this is about being happy? This was never about happiness, you naive little fool. This is about power. This is about a multi-billion-dollar merger. This is about timing." He stalked towards her, his finger jabbing the air in front of her face. "That deal I just closed, it was with Sheikh Al-Hamad, a man whose entire empire is built on family values, on legacy, on tradition. My position was precarious. He needed to know I was stable, that I was a man who understood the importance of an heir." "So you were using me?" Isabella stated the words, tasting like ash. "You were using our baby. Using you." He laughed again, incredulous. "Of course I was using you. Everything is about leverage. I was going to announce it myself next week at the Al-Hamad family dinner in Dubai. I had a speech prepared. It was going to be perfect. It would have sealed my position, made me untouchable. But you couldn't wait. You had to have your little moment of drama, didn't you? You had to stand in the middle of my party and make it all about you." His cruelty was so raw, so undisguised that it took her breath away. The man she thought she knew, The man she had loved was a complete fabrication. Before her stood the real Adrian, a ruthless puppeteer, and she had just been one of his favorite marionettes. And what about her Isabella's voice was barely a whisper? Was Chloe Dubois part of the leverage too? Adrian's eyes narrowed. Chloe is business, a valuable asset, something you clearly know nothing about. She understands the game. She knows the rules. He looked her up and down, his gaze filled with contempt. You wanted to be a part of this world, Isabella. Well, this is it. It's not charity balls and pretty dresses. It's a battlefield, and you just walked into the middle of it with a target painted on your back. He turned away from her, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, the first sign of his composure cracking. You've ruined everything. Alhamid will see this for what it is, a desperate, pathetic sideshow. He'll think I can't even control my own wife. Isabella felt a flicker of defiance ignite within the cold terror. Maybe he'll think she's finally learned how to stand up for herself. Before Adrian could retort, a soft knock came at the door. "Everything all right in there?" a smooth baritone voice called out. Adrian's face shifted again, the mask of civility snapping back into place, albeit imperfectly this time. He opened the door to reveal a man Isabella recognized from the party's periphery. Julian Croft. He was Adrian's chief rival, the CEO of the company Adrian had just outmaneuvered. He was handsome in a more severe, classical way than Adrian, with intelligent, watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Julian Adrian said, his voice tight. "We're fine. Just a private moment." Julian Croft's gaze flickered past Adrian to Isabella. He offered her a small, sympathetic smile. "Of course. My apologies. Well, the whole yacht is buzzing. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." His eyes held Isabella's for a moment longer than necessary, and in them she saw not just sympathy, but a keen, calculating intelligence. He was enjoying this. "We appreciate it, Julian," Adrian said, attempting to close the door. But Julian placed a hand on it, stopping him. "A man like you, Adrian," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "a man who plans everything down to the last detail. I'm sure you have more than one celebration planned for this momentous news." He glanced pointedly back towards the deck, where Chloe Dubois was now surrounded by a group of men, laughing as if she didn't have a care in the world. Some celebrations are just more public than others. With a final knowing nod to Isabella, he turned and walked away. The seed of doubt he had planted was potent. More than one celebration. It echoed the cryptic note in the email about Ms. Dubois. This wasn't just about a business deal with a sheikh. There was another layer to Adrian's deception, something even more vital that her announcement had threatened. Adrian slammed the door, shut his face now, a mask of cold panic. Julian's words had clearly struck a nerve. He looked at Isabella, but he wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing a threat, a loose cannon that had just jeopardized a far more intricate game than she could possibly imagine. "Get dressed," he ordered, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "We're leaving. The party's over." "My party is just beginning," Isabella retorted, a newfound strength hardening her voice. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to go back up there and enjoy the celebration. Our celebration." She reached for the doorknob, but he grabbed her wrist, his grip like steel. "You will do as you're told." He hissed, his face inches from hers. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You have no idea what's at stake." But for the first time, Isabella wasn't afraid. She was terrified, yes, but underneath the terror was a bedrock of certainty. She finally knew exactly who she was dealing with, and she knew that the life of the child inside her depended on her fighting back. She looked down at his hand on her wrist and then back up at his face, her gaze unwavering. The cracks in his facade were showing, and she was determined to shatter it completely. Isabella wrenched her arm free from Adrian's grasp. The shock on his face at her defiance was almost comical. He was so accustomed to her compliance, her quiet acceptance, that this rebellion had short-circuited his brain. "Don't you ever touch me like that again," she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. "You want me to leave, fine. I'll leave. But I'll be taking a launch back to the villa, not scurrying away in disgrace with you." She turned her back on him and walked out of the suite, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, momentarily stunned into inaction. She didn't return to the main deck, where the party was attempting to regain its fractured momentum. The thought of the fake smiles and whispered gossip was suffocating. Instead, she sought refuge following a corridor towards the stern of the yacht, away from the music and the people. She found herself in a small, enclosed solarium. It was a quiet, forgotten space, filled with lush, potted palms and comfortable wicker chairs. Through the panoramic windows, she could see the yacht's wake, a trail of churning white foam under the relentless light of the moon. It felt like a visual representation of her life, a turbulent, messy path left in the wake of Adrian's relentless forward motion. She sank into a chair, the adrenaline from their confrontation draining away, leaving her shaky and exhausted. The weight of her new reality pressed down on her. Her husband didn't love her. He was using her, using their unborn child as a pawn in a game she didn't understand. And Julian Croft's words, more than one celebration. What did they mean? What was the real secret? Adrian was so terrified of her exposing. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening and closing somewhere nearby. It was Adrian's study, a room she had only been in once, a sanctuary of dark wood, leather, and technology from which he ruled his empire. She heard his voice, low and urgent. He was on the phone. Isabella, who had once prided herself on her integrity, on her refusal to eavesdrop or pry, found she no longer cared. She was a woman fighting for her child's future. The old rules no longer applied. She crept out of the solarium and pressed her ear against the heavy teak door of the study. His voice was a venomous whisper, tight with fury and panic. "I don't care what you have to do, just handle it." The timeline is accelerated. "Everything has changed," he hissed. There was a pause. "No, she doesn't know. She thinks this is about the Al-Hamad deal. Let her. It's better that way. She's a sentimental fool. She won't look any deeper." Isabella's stomach clenched. A sentimental fool. That's all she was to him. Adrian continued, his voice dropping even lower, forcing Isabella to press her ear harder against the cold wood. "Listen to me very carefully. The Costa Rican asset needs to be liquidated. All of it. I want the funds transferred to the Cayman account by Monday morning, no later. And I mean all of it. The property, the holdings, everything. We need to be clean." Costa Rica. The Cayman Islands. The words were business jargon, but the context felt deeply, dangerously personal. It sounded like a man erasing a life. There was another, longer pause. Isabella could hear the faint, tinny squawk of the person on the other end of the line. Then Adrian's voice returned, and the words he spoke sent a shard of ice through her heart. "And make sure she never finds out." He said the words clipped and brutal. If she gets wind of this before I'm ready, she could ruin everything. I'll handle the situation here. Just make sure the package is ready for delivery. I'll be in touch with the details." The line went dead. Isabella stumbled back from the door, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Who was she? Was it her? Was he talking about her? Was the package her baby? The thought was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that she felt bile rise in her throat. He was going to handle her. He was liquidating assets, moving money to an offshore account known for its impenetrable secrecy. This was not the behavior of a man trying to salvage a business deal. This was the behavior of a man preparing to disappear, to erase a part of his life completely. Her mind raced. She needed proof. She needed something tangible, something that would translate her formless terror into undeniable fact. His study. He was so panicked, so distracted that he might have gotten careless. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, until she heard the study door open and his footsteps recede down the corridor in the opposite direction. He was likely going back to the party to resume his role as the beaming father-to-be to control the damage. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Isabella tried the handle of the study door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, closing it softly behind her. The room smelled of leather and Adrian's expensive cologne. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, a sleek, state-of-the-art laptop sitting open on its surface. She ignored it, knowing it would be protected by passwords she could never guess. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. Then she saw it. A dark leather briefcase pushed hastily under the desk, not quite out of sight. It was not his usual one. This was older, more worn. It looked like something he kept for private, sensitive matters. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out and laid it on the desk. The latches were not locked. With a deep breath, she flicked them open. The contents were not what she expected. There were no fools on the Al-Hamad deal, no corporate acquisition paperwork. There was a single thick manila folder. Her name was written on the tab in Adrian's sharp, decisive handwriting, Isabella Petrov. Her blood ran cold. With a sense of dread so profound, it felt like she was moving underwater. She opened the folder. The first document was a prenuptial agreement. Not the one she had signed, a fairly standard document her own lawyers had reviewed. This was a different version, a revised draft, dated 6 months ago. It was ruthless. In the event of a divorce, she would be left with virtually nothing, stripped of any claim to his assets, his companies, his homes. A clause was circled in red ink, a clause about moral turpitude and public disgrace, stating that any action which brought the family name into disrepute would nullify the agreement entirely, leaving her utterly destitute. Her stunt tonight would have certainly qualified. Beneath that was something even more sinister. It was a life insurance policy. A policy taken out on her. The beneficiary was not their estate. It was a holding company she had never heard of, registered in the Cayman Islands. The payout was astronomical, a figure so large it seemed like a typo. $50 million. The date the policy was enacted was stamped clearly at the bottom. It was 5 weeks ago, just days after she had joyfully, tearfully told Adrian that she was pregnant. Isabella sank into the leather chair behind the desk, the document spread out before her like a death sentence. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The distance, the secret party, the rage at her announcement, the liquidation of assets, the life insurance policy. He wasn't planning to divorce her. He was planning to erase her. She thought of the package he had mentioned on the phone. Was it possible? Could he be so monstrous as to to arrange for an accident, one that would leave him a grieving widower, a single father to a newborn heir, and $50 million richer. It was the plot of a low-budget thriller, too outlandish to be real. But looking at the cold, hard proof in front of her, Isabella knew. It was real, and it was happening to her. The poisoned whisper she had overheard through the door had not been a misunderstanding. It had been her husband, her child's father, calmly and methodically planning her demise. She was no longer just a sentimental fool in his eyes. She was a liability to be neutralized. And the hidden heir in her womb was not a joy to be celebrated, but a complication to be managed in the aftermath of her death. The muted thrum of the party outside the study's soundproofed walls was a grotesque symphony of ignorance. They were out there, these titans of industry, and their glittering consorts drinking champagne and celebrating a monster completely oblivious to the fact that the man they toasted was not just a corporate predator, but a man who had coldly calculated the monetary value of his own wife's life. A cold, clear fury, purer and more potent than any emotion she had ever experienced, washed through Isabella. It was a cleansing fire, incinerating the last remnants of fear, of love, of hope for what might have been. It was the primal incandescent rage of a mother protecting her young from a viper. She did not weep. The time for tears was over, a luxury afforded to victims, and she would not be a victim. She meticulously gathered the documents, the vicious secret prenup, the damning life insurance policy with its Cayman Islands beneficiary. They felt heavy in her hand, not with the weight of paper, but with the weight of absolute proof. This was her weapon now, her shield. She would not be handled. She would not be erased. She would be the storm that broke his carefully constructed world. She walked out of the study, her steps steady, her posture erect. She moved with a purpose that felt entirely new, as if the shock had fused her spine with steel. As she moved through the yacht's luxurious corridors, she caught her reflection in a pane of polished glass. The pale, uncertain woman from the villa was gone. In her place was a figure robed in ivory, her face a mask of chilling resolve, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. Emerging onto the main deck was like stepping onto a stage. The party, having recovered from her initial arrival, had regained its fractured momentum. The jazz band played a smooth, innocuous tune. Waiters circulated with trays of glistening canapes, and at the very center of it all, holding court, was Adrian. He stood with a small group of his most important guests, the Russian oligarch Dmitry Volkov, two stern-faced German investors, and to her grim satisfaction, Julian Croft, who was observing the scene with the unnerving stillness of a patient predator. Adrian had a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, and he was laughing a rich, confident sound that boomed across the deck. He looked completely at ease, a king in his castle, having dismissed her earlier outburst as a minor feminine hysteria he had already capably managed. He saw her approaching, and the indulgent smile on his face tightened into a flicker of profound annoyance. He clearly expected her to be sequestered below, weeping or sleeping. Her presence here now was an act of insubordination. "Darling," he said, stepping forward to intercept her before she could reach the group, his voice a low warning disguised as endearment. "I thought we agreed you needed to rest. You look pale." "I've never felt clearer in my life," Isabella said, her voice dangerously calm, loud enough to cut through the nearby chatter. She elegantly sidestepped his attempt to block her moving directly into the center of the influential circle. The conversation faltered. All eyes turned to her. She had their undivided attention. "Adrian," she began addressing him, but projecting her voice to everyone present. "I apologize for interrupting your very important conversations, but I was just doing some light reading in your study. You really should be more careful about where you leave your private papers. It's so revealing." Adrian's smile was gone, replaced by a rigid mask of fury. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale sheen under the party lights. "Isabella," he gritted out, "this is neither the time nor the place for your games." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place," she retorted, her voice as sharp and cold as breaking ice. She held up the sheaf of papers, her hand perfectly steady. "I think your friends, your partners, the men whose fortunes are tied to yours, should know what a thoughtful, forward-thinking husband you are. A real family man." She held up the life insurance policy, letting the moonlight catch the official letterhead. For example, this fascinating document, a life insurance policy for $50 million, taken out on me just last month. Isn't that romantic? Her voice dripped with a venomous sarcasm that made the German investors exchange a nervous glance. "He's ensuring my future, our child's future, is utterly secure." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "The only strange thing is the beneficiary isn't our family. It's a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. I believe the file was labeled contingency." "And what a coincidence," she added, her eyes locking onto Adrian's. "It's the same tax haven you were just screaming at your associate to liquidate all your Costa Rican assets to. I imagine that's just prudent financial planning, too." A collective audible gasp went through the small crowd. Dmitry Volkov, the oligarch, stared openly, his jovial expression gone, replaced by the hard, calculating look of a man sniffing out a massive liability. Julian Croft's eyebrow arched in a perfect expression of feigned surprise, but his eyes danced with undisguised glee. Adrian's composure, his entire life's performance of unassailable control, finally irrevocably shattered. He was no longer a charming host or a brilliant CEO. He was a cornered animal. He lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage, and grabbed for her arm, trying to snatch the papers away. "Give me those. You're hysterical. You have no idea what you're talking about." Isabella pulled back with surprising strength, clutching the documents to her chest. "Hysterical, am I?" Her voice rose, ringing with righteous fury, a clarion call of accusation that silenced the entire yacht. The band trailed off mid-note. Every head on every deck turned towards them. Or did I just discover that my husband, the celebrated father-to-be, is planning to have me killed for an insurance payout? The accusation hung in the hot, humid air, monstrous, unthinkable, and utterly riveting. A woman screamed somewhere on the upper deck. The idyllic party had just turned into a public trial. And then Adrian began to laugh. It was not a sound of humor or mirth. It was a ghastly, unhinged torrent of sound that clawed its way out of his throat. He threw his head back and howled at the moon, a laugh of pure nihilistic amusement. It was the laugh of a man who had been caught but felt no remorse, only contempt for the fool who had caught him. The chilling sound washed over the guests, more terrifying than any threat. "Killed," he wheezed, wiping a genuine tear of laughter from his eye. He looked at Isabella as if she were the most pathetic, idiotic creature he had ever seen. "Oh, my sweet, darling, naive little wife. Your imagination is spectacular. You read too many cheap novels." He turned to the stunned, silent crowd. "My friends, I do apologize. My wife is unwell. These pregnancy hormones can be so dreadfully dramatic." He turned back to Isabella, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, triumphant light that bespoke a much deeper level of depravity. The insurance policy. The prenup. My dear, that's just business. A contingency plan. Paperwork to keep the lawyers busy in a worst-case scenario. You found a smoke screen, Isabella, not a murder plot. You are so much less important than that. He took a step closer, invading her space, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial purr that was meant to unnerve and dominate. The real secret, he said, savoring the moment, the absolute power of his hidden truth. The real reason for this party is so much more magnificent than your pedestrian little fantasies. His eyes scanned the crowd, a showman preparing for his grand reveal. You all think this party is for the Al-Hamad deal a trifle. You think I'm celebrating a corporate victory insignificant. He paused, letting the tension coil into an unbearable knot. Tonight, Isabella, is my 5-year wedding anniversary. Isabella could only stare, her mind struggling to process the non sequitur. Our anniversary isn't for another 3 months. Adrian's smile was a slash of pure predatory victory. Not our anniversary, my love. My anniversary with my other wife. The world did not just tilt, it disintegrated. The sounds of the yacht, the sea, the shocked gasps of the onlookers all faded into a dull, static roar in Isabella's ears. Other. Wife. The words were alien, nonsensical, yet they landed with the force of a physical blow. Her name is Sophia. Adrian continued, gloating, now feeding off the collective shock. She's at our home in the Cayman Islands. Our real home. She's a magnificent woman from a powerful family in Colombia, not a naive journalist. She understands how the world really works, and she is waiting for me along with our 4-year-old son Alexander, my real heir. He has my eyes. He had a family, a whole other life, a son. The secrecy, the endless business trips, the coldness, the lies, it all cascaded down on Isabella in a torrent of unbearable, clarifying truth. She wasn't the wife he was planning to kill. She was worse. She was irrelevant. A prop. The beautiful, socially acceptable American wife he used to open doors in the West, while his real life, his real family was hidden away in a fortress of offshore accounts and secrecy. The Costa Rican assets. It was Sophia's family money, being shielded before the inevitable fallout of his eventual quiet divorce from his American problem. You are a bigamist, Dmitry Volkov sputtered, staring at Adrian as if he were a creature from the abyss. Details, details. Adrian waved a dismissive hand, drunk on his own audacity. You see, Isabella, your pregnancy was a terribly inconvenient complication. My plan was to eventually tire of you divorce, you quietly give you a comfortable but not extravagant settlement, and consolidate my life with my real family. But then you announced this. He gestured towards her stomach with disgust. So the plan had to change. I wasn't going to kill you too messy, too many questions. I was simply going to paint you as an unstable, hysterical, unfit mother, and I would have taken our child. My second son. It would have been a nasty custody battle, but I would have won. I always win. The sheer breathtaking scope of his evil, the meticulous, cold-hearted architecture of his deception, was beyond anything Isabella could have imagined. She felt the strength drain from her limbs and stumbled backward, the damning papers fluttering from her grasp. But before she could fall, a strong, steady arm caught her. It was Julian Croft. He moved with fluid grace, stepping in front of Isabella, effectively shielding her. His expression was no longer one of amusement. It was the cold, hard face of a victor. "It's over, Adrian," Julian said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Your little game is up." Adrian stared at him, his victorious smirk finally faltering a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What are you talking about, Croft? Don't tell me you've developed a conscience." "Conscience has nothing to do with it. This is just good business," Julian said calmly. "I've known about Sophia for 6 months. A disgruntled vice president of yours is remarkably talkative when you offer him a senior position at a rival company. I've been feeding her information ever since. About your indiscretions, about your public wife. I even gave her a little anonymous tip that you might be having a very special, very secret celebration on your yacht tonight." He looked at Isabella, and for the first time his eyes held a flicker of something that might have been genuine respect. "I knew he'd underestimate you. I knew that if you were pushed far enough, you'd do something spectacular. And you did not disappoint." Julian pulled out his phone, its screen glowing in the dim light. "Sophia is a very clever woman, Adrian. And a very, very angry one. She's on a conference call right now with 3 members of your board of directors, the head of enforcement at the SEC, and a senior journalist from the Wall Street Journal. She has authenticated marriage certificates, her son's birth certificate, bank statements, detailing your illegal asset transfers. Everything. Your kingdom isn't just being threatened, Adrian. It's already gone." The color drained completely from Adrian's face. The mask of the master of the universe dissolved, revealing a hollowed-out, panicked man. He looked around wildly at the faces of his former allies, who were now backing away from him as if he were carrying a plague. He looked at the German investors who were already speaking frantically into their phones. He looked at Julian, the architect of his ruin. And finally he looked at Isabella, at the woman he had so casually planned to destroy, and saw not a victim, but a terrifying angel of judgment. The maelstrom had hit. The moonlit yacht party had become the scene of a spectacular, inescapable shipwreck, and Adrian Petrov, the man with 2 wives, 2 lives, and no heart, was going down with the vessel. The fallout was catastrophic. In the aftermath of that moonlit night, Adrian Petrov's empire didn't just crumble. It was pulverized. The story of his bigamy, his cruelty, and his breathtaking deceit became a global scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and splattered across tabloids. He lost his company, his fortune, and his freedom buried under an avalanche of legal battles from 2 wives, cheated investors, and federal investigators. The Serafina was seized, a silent, floating tombstone for a dead legacy. But for Isabella, the storm's end was the beginning of a new, quiet dawn. She did not want revenge or a piece of his ruined empire. She wanted peace. She retreated from the world that had almost consumed her, finding solace not in a marble mansion, but in a small sunlit house by the sea, far from the whispers and the wreckage. There she rediscovered the woman she was, before Adrian, strong, independent, and fiercely protective of the new life growing within her. Her journey was a brutal one, a trial by fire that burned away a life of illusion to reveal a core of unbreakable strength. She learned that true wealth isn't measured in yachts and stock prices, but in the fierce, unwavering love a mother has for her child, the one true heir to a future she would build with her own 2 hands. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? How does a woman find the courage to fight back against a monster who wears the face of the man she loves?